We know far more about our students by their total application than we do from their test. We prefer using the whole picture. It is because I agree with Michael Murphy, Dean of Admission and Financial Aid at Antioch College, in the position that college and universities should not use standardized testing when deciding an admission, that I feel compelled to affirm today's resolution. Resolved. In the United States, college and universities ought not to consider standardized tests in undergraduate admission decisions. For clarification of today's round, I offer the following definitions. Ought, defined by Merriam-Webster as a word used to express obligation. Standardize, also defined by Merriam-Webster as a word, something done or produced in a standard or consistent way. The highest value within today's round is justice is fairness. Justice is fairness is a concept of justice defined by John Rawls as a society of free citizens holding equal basic rights and cooperating with an agrarian economic system. Justice is fairness is most important in today's round because no matter what kind of grades you receive on a test, every person deserves an equal opportunity to attend these well-respected schools and universities. The best criterion for evaluating the resolution is personalism. Personalism is defined as a doctrine emphasizing the significance, uniqueness, and inviolability of a personality. It best achieves my value of justice is fairness because when applying to schools and colleges, people's applications should be based on what kind of person they are and what they could bring to the school, not just to see how smart you are. In affirming today's resolution, I offer the following contentions. Contention 1. Standardized tests are an unreliable measure of student performance. If my future were determined just by performance on a standardized test, I wouldn't be here. I guarantee you that. This is something that the First Lady of the United States said. Michelle Obama is one of the most intelligent and successful women in the world, and she did not do well on standardized tests. The above statement furthermore supports the idea that standardized tests do not accurately measure a student's intelligence and performance. There are many factors that can impact a student's test score negatively, including stress, lack of language skills, and lack of special need accommodations. Additionally, standardized tests do not test every field of education, making them all the more inaccurate. A Brookings Institution study found that 50 to 80% of year-over-year test score improvements were temporary. Leading up to the standardized testing, teachers overwhelm their students with information to study that will appear on the test. Students typically end up binge studying and do not retain most of the information. If a student were given a standardized test 1 week after binge studying for the night, their scores would be significantly lower as they did not retain what they had learned. Furthermore, students understand that they can rarely apply knowledge that they have learned for the test to real-life scenarios, making them even less eager to make the information stick. Standardized testing is not a valid or respectable way to access the education of a child is receiving. That child's intelligence or ability of the teacher to convey knowledge. Standardized testing should be abandoned and those resources allocated to helping students who are falling behind and working with students who show exceptional promise. Rather than continue to allow standardized testing to quantify the effectiveness of an education, we should create a system of effective education that requires no quantification. Contention 2. Standardized tests measure only a small portion of what makes education meaningful. Standardized tests measure only a small portion of what makes education meaningful. Standardized tests do not show what students are good at or a student's potential for college. These tests are said to only determine a student's knowledge in reading, writing, math, and science. As revealed in the Pro-Con headline study, education researcher Gerald W. Bracey, PhD, qualifies that the standardized test cannot measure any significant qualities in a person's life. Standardized tests are an unreliable measure of student performance. The only measure of a small portion of what makes education meaningful. The standardized test cannot measure creativity, motivation, endurance, empathy, self-awareness, or life skills students learn and use every day. They are only addressing a small piece of the puzzle, not the whole learning experience. If we neglect creative students in schools because of the structure of testing movement, they will become underachievers. On the website Standardized Tests Pros and Cons, the National Research Council states, Despite using those for several decades, policymakers and educators do not know yet how to use test-based incentives to consistently generate positive effects on education. Reports can find no evidence of test-based programs working. Taking tests might make kids good test takers, but it does not ready them for what they are going to have to face in the real world. On May 26, 2011, National Research Council conducted a study on a test-based incentive and found that despite using them for several decades, policymakers and educators do not yet know how to use test-based incentives to consistently generate positive effects on the achievement and to improve education. Now, there are many factors and studies that prove why standardized tests do not measure a student's intellect and skills. These tests not only stress many students, but have even begun to affect teachers. It is not fair for universities and colleges to only look at a student's ACT or SAT scores. Students' grades and GPA is what colleges should look at when students are applying for college. These are the things to show a student's knowledge and abilities for college in a more effective way. Contention 3. Standardized tests cause severe stress in younger students. While the effects of standardized tests on a teacher and learning areas grounds for concern, the effects it has on its students physically and emotionally are also quite troubling and deserve some attention. Students often face high stress levels from pressure related to college admissions to demands of school more generally. The stakes are high at the schools when it comes to standardized testing. According to the 2016 ranking by the U.S. News, Washington Lee is ranked the 17th in the state and was awarded the gold medal for being one of the best high schools in the country. Teachers and administrations have had high expectations for their students to uphold, if not improve, these statistics. There is a lot of pressure for students to do well on high-stakes standardized tests in order for the school to succeed, and students are overwhelmed. Stress caused by standardized tests can lead to some serious problems. For example, students can experience disturbed sleep patterns, abnormal tiredness, extreme anxiety, irregular eating habits, and the inability to concentrate. Extreme levels like this in kids are completely preventable, and teachers, students, and parents all agree that something should be done to prevent it. All in all, standardized tests might be a way for the state to see valuable information its students All in all, standardized tests might be a way for the state to see valuable information about its students' residents, but it is not worth the burden it puts on these kids to succeed. When you add up the pressure put on students, the quantity of tests we take, it isn't worth it, or even healthy for the kids for this matter. We have to remember that every student is an individual with his or her own talents and skills. For this reason, not all students excel in the same subject. Every student is unique and cannot be treated as a whole. Standardized tests made for a standard student cannot accurately determine the intelligence and performance of an individual. It only puts students into more stress, causing them to do worse. Conclusion. I have shown you that standardized tests are an unreliable measure of student performance. Standardized tests measure only a small portion of what makes education meaningful, and standardized tests cause severe stress in younger students. For these reasons, we can clearly conclude that justice and fairness should be upheld, and in the United States, colleges and universities ought not to consider standardized tests in undergraduate admission decision.